Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This is a conversation with creative humans. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. As the former director of user experience at Epic Games, Celia worked on Fortnite, one of the most successful video games in history, with more than 78 million active players. Her mission was to understand how our brain works, how it learns, and what its main limitations are in order to improve the video gamer's experiences. Here she describes her creative process, including the way to build a climate of trust to interact efficiently with the video game's creators. Speaking of designing the user's experience, are we being manipulated? That's the question of the week. It's time to listen to her. And to start, she told me what she tried to do all her life.
All my life I've tried to get better at anything I was doing. It was difficult to get better at understanding others, to get better at pushing yourself, to not rest on your laurels. Getting better at understanding others is difficult because it requires you to not take anything personally. At work, sometimes people can hurt you or hurt your ego or whatever. And it's all about thinking, all right, this person comes from somewhere. What are their problems? And they're probably not intentionally trying to hurt me or trying to hurt my ego. They're trying to get to somewhere. And how can I try to put myself in their shoes and just like swallow my ego to try to get better at communicating and so we can work together. That's hard.
I like the expression swallowing your ego. Mm-hmm. Is it even possible? I mean to better understand someone else.
I don't know if it's possible to completely swallow it, but it's possible to, when your ego is hurt, and we all have feelings and we all are trying to accomplish something. And when someone is going against what you're trying to accomplish and it's hurting you in some way, it could be hurting your feelings or hurting what you're trying to accomplish, it is possible to stop and think about why that person is going there.
To rationalize.
Yeah, rationalizes. I like that term. I always try to do that. Of course, it's not always possible. If you're tired, if you're under pressure, if you're stressed out, you're already making so much effort to go through your day. So it's the additional mental load that you need to rationalize is hard. And even if you're trying to be on a diet, the more stress you have during the day, the harder it's going to be at the end of the day to resist that piece of chocolate that you really want to have. So I love that concept of we have just so much workload that we can handle. And so whenever we feel overwhelmed by a situation, we need to stop and think. And that's why meditation is pretty powerful. I can't meditate. I'm trying, but it's really hard for me. I prefer to just go for a walk in the park, for example, watch nature. It's easier for me to do that.
How did you come from psychology to the video game industry?
That was serendipity. I've always played video games. When I was a kid, my parents, more especially my father, would buy the consoles and we would play, the three of us, video games. So that was part of my childhood, and we played video games just like we played any other games, like board games, dice games, card games.
But it was supposed to be a boy thing at the time, no?
No, not at the time. At the time, it was actually a family thing. If you look at how Nintendo was advertised back in the early 80s, it was the whole family playing video games. It only started to be targeted towards boys when the 3D environment games started, especially first-person shooters. This is when there was a shift. But at the beginning, video games were for everyone. And so when after I had my PhD in psychology, I was specialized in child development. I didn't want to stay in academia, so I started to think about what can I do with a PhD in psychology and specialize in child development. I started to work at VTech. They do educational games and toys for children. And during my time there, they were doing some video games, and I really liked working on these products. And that's the moment that I realized there were some parents that were very afraid of video games. They thought that it was a stupid kind of entertainment, that their kids, it was melting their kids' brains. And that was surprising to me because I never felt that when I grew up. So I started to look into the science behind it. Are there studies that show that video game can impede the development of children? This is not what I found. Video games are not necessarily better than any other activity, but they're not worse. And so I started to work to write a lot of articles about that in France and do some talks, conventions. And at that time, Ubisoft was looking for someone with a background in neuroscience or psychology to make beta games. And this is how we met. That's truly serendipity for me.
So later on, you were hired by another company to work on Fortnite. Tell me about your role in the creation of the best-selling game Fortnite. What did you do exactly?
Sure. So yeah, Epic Games hired me. It was in 2013. So before that, I was at LucasArts and Ubisoft. And when I started working at Epic Games, I became the director of user experience. User experience is about designing your products, your games, your systems, your services with a human-centered design process. So you put your end user at the center of the process instead of maybe putting your engineers at the center of the process, and they're gonna do whatever is easier for them to code. And so for Fortnite, so I did not just work on Fortnite, but I was very focused on Fortnite because the team was very eager to work with these methodology of UX. That is very new in the game industry. It's been around for decades in other industries. In the game industry, it's just like recently, in the past 5 years, that really it became something that people started to be interested in. And so the Fortnite team was very eager to try to understand this methodology and understand the science behind it so we could build together the game. And so long story short, it's all about understanding how the brain works, how it learns, and what are the main limitations of our brains. And once we understand that, we can design so that we can take account for it. For example, we know that perception is subjective. If I'm showing you an icon, let's say I'm designing an icon. For me, it's obvious. This is an icon that's going to represent, a smoke bomb, let's say. And I'm designing it, and to me it's obvious, but then when you look at it, or when players who play video games look at it, they might not see that there's smoke. They might perceive, this is just something that's going to explode.
Is it just about the difference of perception, or is it a cultural thing?
It's both. Perception is subjective. It means that depending on your past experience with certain games, depending on your expectation, depending on the context, sometimes the same input can be perceived differently in different contexts. And of course, culture is going to have an impact. So all of that is going to have an impact on how we perceive things. That's the reason why there's a lot of miscommunication sometimes, because we think that it's so obvious that what we perceive is the reality, but we do not perceive the reality as it is. Perception is a construct of the mind. So I don't know if you remember all the things on Twitter. There was like the blue and black dress, and some people were saying it's white and gold, and people were so surprised that people don't perceive the same thing. It's a very basic thing that we know. Perception is subjective.
Does it mean that it's impossible to build the same video game for everybody on Earth?
It's quite challenging. There's some evidence that maybe we're not processing a scene in the same way. Like in Western countries, we read from left to right, so we might not have the same process to look at a scene as in different countries. They read top down or right to left. So colors, that the color red has a very different meaning in China than it has here. So all that is going to impact the way you perceive things, impact your expectations on things. So it can be very difficult to design a game for everybody. And you usually need the help of someone specialized in culturalization, so that person can anticipate, problems. But yeah, usually you have different versions for the different territories.
So, as a user experience, you helped game developers to offer the best experience for the gamers. How would you define what the best experience is for them?
Yeah, so we don't define that. What we do is so I do UX strategy. So I go to the team and ask them, what is it you're trying to accomplish with your game? What is it you want the players to feel? What is your goal, etc. Then also go see the executives, what are the business goals? What sort of business model are you going to do? Because you don't design a free-to-play game the way you design a box game that's just going to sell and people are going to buy it, and it's not free-to-play. So we try to make sure that everybody's aligned, and depending on what the game team is trying to accomplish, I'm going to make sure that this is what the players feel. So there's no one way to offer a great experience. If you're making a game like Candy Crush, it's very way more casual, so you can play every now and then, and it's going to be very different if you do a game like Dark Souls, which is a game that's for hardcore gamers. It's a very harsh game. It's really punishing. So in that case, we're going to allow for that punishment to happen. We're just going to make sure that the players understand why they died and how they can get better at it. So there's no one recipe to make a good and successful game. What we do have is we have ingredients. And with these ingredients, once we know them, we can make up our own recipe. There's two main pillars for good game user experience. The first one is usability, and the second one is what I call engageability. Usability is just like any product, is the ability of the game or any product that you're using to be used. So let's say you want to drink water. If it's complicated to open the bottle of water, it means that it has bad usability. So in games, it's the same thing. If you don't understand the icons, like I was talking about earlier, if you don't understand where to go, what is the main objectives, if you're overwhelmed with too much information, all that is bad usability. So that's the first thing, is really important, but a game that has good usability is not enough, because we don't play a game. It's not a means to an end. You don't play a game to do something. It's an autotelic activity. You play a game just for the pleasure of playing it. So games need to be engaging, because otherwise you're not going to play them. So that's the second part, what I call engageability, the ability of the game to be engaging. So the main ingredients there is going to be motivation, emotion, and what we call game flow. So motivation, you have to be motivated into playing the game. So we need to look into extrinsic motivation, rewards. You do a mission, you expect to have a reward from it, like a new cool ability, for example. We need to feel competent in playing the game. We need to feel that we're getting better, that we're progressing. That's the same thing in life. We need to see that we're progressing, otherwise you quit. Autonomy is the ability to express yourself.
How is it possible to give the gamers such an autonomy?
A lot of games now build worlds. Like Ubisoft, this is really what they do. They're building worlds for the gamers, so that they can do whatever they want within the game world. So of course there are rules in the world, but you can use these rules differently. And for example, in Fortnite, at some point there was like a rocket that could use to destroy buildings or whatever. And at some point, one player thought of, I'm gonna jump on the rocket, and so I'm gonna travel super fast, and then I'm gonna snipe the other player over there. That's what we call emergent gameplay. It was not necessarily thought ahead of time that players would detour that feature that way. But if you have systems, then it allows for players to do that. And once you do that, then players are going to be super excited because they're autonomous and they can do whatever they want. And that's worth sharing. And it's worth watching players doing something super cool that you hadn't thought of before. So that's the kind of thing that allows for players to be autonomous. And the last one is relatedness. We are very social species. This is thanks to our social skills that we have survived our predators. And so any games that can allow for cooperation or competition, cooperation is even more powerful than competition, are going to be usually more compelling.
And behind that, how can cognitive psychology be used to improve user experience?
We try to understand how the brain works and what are the main brain limitations, so we can make sure that the game is not adding some frictions that are not by design. So we test all that. That's the reason why we do play tests. We bring players over to test the game in development, so we can test the game and we can see where our assumptions were false and where we doing well, so we can iterate on all the different designs, all the different systems in the game appropriately.
Did the game developers accept easily your interaction with them? Because they are the creators, and it's sometimes difficult to accept some limitation from, let's say, outside.
Yeah, it's hard, but again, it's always when we started talking about miscommunications. There's a lot of misconception around UX mindset. The first misconception is that UX is going to distort the design intentions. That's the reason why I started by saying there's no one good experience, and always trying to understand what is it the team is trying to accomplish, so I can give them the tools to accomplish that. And so, of course, at the beginning, you need to explain what you do. And so I started by focusing on the people that understood the methodology and wanted to work with me. And we demonstrated quick wins. So we iterated on a few things together. And then other people were like, oh, that sounds interesting. And this is how you do it. You don't say, oh, I know all the things and let work with me, so you'll see everything's going to be much better in your life.
You start a conversation.
Yes, you start a conversation. You build trust. That's really important, to build trust.
And you're a psychologist. Tell me, how do you do to build trust with anyone?
So first of all, you try to put yourself in their shoes. And if they're resisting your methodology or what you have to propose, you try to understand why are they resisting. Is it because they don't necessarily know what's behind? Or is it because they have a lot of pressure from their own bosses and now they don't want to deal with all that because, again, their mental load is already overloaded by that. So some people are more resistant than others. You can't convince everyone. That's the reason why you need to focus on the people that you feel you can convince, and always make sure that they feel that we are on the same boat. It's important to not feel as if you're the usability police, for example, that you're going to report back to the executives or the things that go wrong. We are partners in this. So this together, we're going to figure things out. We're going to find out the problems and solve for the right problems, because that's the main thing. Solving problems is easy, but solving the right problems at the right priority is what is difficult. So we work together to accomplish that. I don't have the recipe. I have ingredients. Same thing, you have to let them feel autonomous, let them feel competent, and you have to make sure that you establish a meaningful relationship. So it's really the same ingredients that you use to make a better user experience in game. This is what you use to do a better experience in the workplace. It's exactly the same ingredients. You can apply it to everything, politics, anything in life. You just need to understand where people are coming from and try to get there with them.
You use cognitive psychology to improve the gamer's experience. And I'm thinking that behind that, our emotional processes are faster than the way we are aware of them.
Yes, but it's mostly that there's a lot of things that we are not even conscious of. The brain is very, very complex. We don't really understand the emotions that we feel and why and where it's coming from. And so there's a big discipline in psychology called behavioral economics. They're explaining how we doing the wrong things in life and we make the wrong decisions and act irrationally because we're just not able to identify what's going on. And yes, it's emotions, but it's also because the brain is using shortcuts and we don't know about that. For example, there's appraisal. So it's how we anticipate our emotions. That's going to change the way we feel about things. There's a lot of research around this, or you blind test people with wine. Sometimes a lot of people don't even recognize white from red wines when they're blindfolded. And so we don't realize our emotions, our cognition, our expectation is changing the way we feel about things. All of that is unconscious biases, and that's a huge one to tackle because people are going to make the wrong decisions because they are not even aware of what's going on. So you have techniques in marketing. For example, they use a decoy when you have any offers online. But let's say you can get a subscription to a magazine and can have for $59, it's going to be online subscription only. Then for 125 it's going to be print subscription only, and then for 125 as well, it's going to be print and web. When you show that, most people are going to take the print and web for 125. No one's going to pick the print only for 125, and you have like maybe 20% and choose the cheapest one. You might think that the option at the middle, you only have print for 125 is useless. But if you remove that option and then you ask people between the web only for 59 or web and print for 125, which one you would get, most people are going to pick the web only. So there's a huge shift into decision making. And so the middle option is used as a decoy. It's what we call the decoy effect. So often in offers that online, you're going to see that there's always 3 options. There's always one that sounds weird, and this one is used as a decoy to make you buy a higher, a more expensive option.
So it's manipulation.
Yes, but everything in design is manipulation. I understand the fear around this, but design is about encouraging certain behaviors and discouraging others. If you go into your car and you start driving, the car is going to beep very annoyingly until you fasten your seatbelt. That's manipulation as well. Everything in design, if you look at bottle, it's narrower at the center. It's helping you to hold that bottle, but you can say it's manipulating me into holding it at that specific area.
So it's about the purpose.
It's about the purpose. It's not the design that we call that dark patterns. It's not the design by itself that's going to be a dark pattern. It's intention behind. If the intention is a win-win situation, we want to make money, but we also want to make sure that you're happy with your product. It's a win-win situation. Sometimes it's at the expense of people that we're going to manipulate them into signing up to your newsletter or signing up to whatever service that you want them to use without them noticing that this is what they're doing when they check out. When people don't understand what's going on and it's not a win-win situation, this is when we call that a dark pattern.
You know how to engage and retain gamers into a game. Do you know how to prevent screen addiction? Because it's the other side of your knowledge as a psychologist.
We have to be careful with addiction. Addiction describes a pathology. I'm not saying addiction to games does not exist. It exists. Some people are suffering from it and they need help. But there's evidence that is less than 1% of the general population that can qualify as being addicted to games. And we have over 2 billion gamers in the world. So addiction is a problem, but it's not the main concern that we have currently. The main concern that I have is more around what we call the attention economy. You are on YouTube and you're watching a YouTube video, and then you have the autoplay. Autoplay is here to encourage you to keep watching YouTube. And once YouTube does that, then Netflix has to do it, because if one platform does it and not the other, then the others, they know that they're gonna miss out. So all that is made to retain your attention. But now we can't say that this is creating addiction. We don't create addiction, but we have to be careful.
You can create conditions for the addiction. I mean, everything is made. That's what you were saying. Everything is made to capture and retain the gamer's attention. That's the purpose.
Yeah, but that's not addiction. You're addicted when you can't get away from it. Most of us, we're gonna binge watch something on Netflix, or we're gonna eat too much at one point, or we're gonna do something for too long. But most of us also at some point are like, oh yeah, let's stop. I know that I spend too much time on Facebook. I need to get away with it. It means that we're not addicted. We can get away from it. What happens though is there are mechanisms that encourage you to keep going, because we remove the frictions. And so if you're bored, I'm going to watch Facebook or whatever, go on YouTube just to kill time, and because, there's another video and it's interesting, etc., etc. If you're going to Disneyland and you stay all day because it's fun, and when you're lining up, there's stuff happening, so you don't feel that you're waiting for too long. They use all these little things to make the experience great. So it's the same mechanisms. The problem is that the main problem we have is that games and technology, now it's in our pocket. So it's just harder to get away from it because it's always there.
But my question wasn't about video game addiction, but about screen addiction. Whatever the Wikipedia or the most interesting website it could be, it's just the screen addiction itself.
Again, if you look at the research, there is no evidence so far to talk about screen addiction. Screens are omnipresent. This is how we work. This is how we connect with our friends and families. This is how we play. This is how we listen to music. So of course we're going to use screens a lot because this is a tool, and this is a tool that's very powerful. It doesn't mean that we're addicted to the tool. We do many different things through screens. So this is what we need to look into. What are we accessing through screens? Now, of course, for children and adults, at some point you need to get away from the screens. It can be straining. You need to go outside. Like we were talking about meditation earlier. It's important for the brain to turn off. And when your screen is in your pocket, it can be more difficult to do this. So,
even impossible.
No, it's not impossible. A lot of people will manage to do it. So we have to think about that in terms of ethics. This is the attention economy for sure, but we have to be careful about the terms that we're using because there's a lot of fear mongering around it, and that reinforces a stigma, and it's actually not helping solving the problems. Because now if you say to Google, Apple, Epic Games, or like any video game developers, say, oh, you're creating addiction, this is bad, and people are going to be like, what are you talking about? But if we say, well, think about how you are encouraging people to always stay on platforms and everybody's doing this, and at the end of the day, it's not necessarily good for us. We need to turn off and we need to be able to go outside and do other things. It's a different discussion.
Precisely, what would be the right advice as a psychologist you would address to people who like to play video games?
So if you have kids, you have to understand what your kids are playing, but you have to put some rules because kids, by definition, they are not good at self-control. We're not great at it either as adults, but we're better at it. So as an adult, you need to place rules so that your kids, they can stop at some point. You also need to understand that when they play video games, they play Fortnite, for example, it's not just they're playing alone in Fortnite. They are joining. It's as if they were going into the yard to play with their friends. So you have to understand that they're playing with their friends and they're in an environment, a social environment. So when you're telling them stop playing, what you're saying is like stop being with your friends. So it's going to be important to, if you know who they're playing with, and you should know who they're playing with, make sure you reach out to the other parents. And then let's say our kids are going to play Fortnite from 6 to 7, and they're all going to stop at the same time. It's going to be much easier than if you're alone into telling your kids now you stop playing. It's all about balancing it out and helping children do that.
I'm going to leave the room. Please hold the microphone and add whatever you want to the interview.
All right, sounds good. That was very interesting. Well, what I want to add is whatever you do in your life, try to think about how other people perceive what you're doing. It's really hard to take a step back and try to think about how other people perceive things. Perception is subjective. It's a construct of the mind. It's very good to try to do that exercise and not take things personally. Maybe think about why are the others perceiving things that way. Maybe they're stressed out. Maybe there's something going on with their lives. That's going to help us live in a society, and we do need to live together. But to live together, we need to understand each other and recognize that we are all biased, that we're making mistakes, that we're not rational, so that together we can build a society that's going to be inclusive and more equitable. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Celia, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. Music Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.